thing just to mention that there are different numbers going on. Like there's an OECD data and there's CPI data. A lot of people ask like why we have this. Thing just to mention it, and then just to there are different numbers going on. Like there's an OECD data and there's CPI data. A lot of people ask like why. So for example, the collaboration with the IDFC, different numbers.
So that's really useful to have that overview. And I'm guessing that we can kind of find all that on your website as well, right? So for those who couldn't take it all in, there's more to learn and more to find out. Let's turn to Agence Française de Développement. You're active, very active, particularly in Africa, 44 African countries, actually. And I'd like to ask you a sort of two-pronged question, if I may. First of all, tell us a bit about what you found out through your recent assessment of adaptation projects in sub-Saharan Africa, but also a little bit about how you think, as a member of the International Development Finance Club, this methodology might help you in terms of directing your projects in adaptation as well.
Thank you, Shireen. I might start maybe by saying that actually the numbers you were talking about and the tracking is also on IDFC website.
Right.
Because my friends from the Secretariat are here, so the Green Finance Mapping has particularly a focus on the adaptation agenda this year. So that's something that I wanted to start with.
Thanks.
So as it was said by most of the people that talked before me, the adaptation agenda is actually really high in this COP, and we see that really positively at AFD. Of course, the fact that it started by the adoption of the Loss and Damage Fund from the first day, and with commitment from several countries, including France, and also the fact that during this COP we have announced on our side additional contribution to France side, additional contribution to the adaptation fund is also something that we see positively. So it's really timely that this announcement is made today of IDFC joining MDBs in following these common principles. And on the fact that we are not yet at the level of the challenge of adaptation finance, I just want also to jump on something you have said about the fact that we are at 5% of the total climate finance, that is adaptation finance. And actually, it has reduced. It was 7%. On top of not being sufficiently, as a relative share of the total climate finance, it has reduced from 7% to 5%. So that's something also to show how much it is our new challenge as financiers, as development bank, to try to tackle it and to put that even higher in the agenda. At AFD, we are the first public development bank that was 100% Paris aligned since 2017, and we have some targets, objectives of climate finance. Our objective is 50% of climate finance and 30% for adaptation. As of 2022, it was a record year. We were higher than our expectations. We are at 62% of our annual financing in climate finance, which is 6.9 billion. Euros, and it included 2.2 billion euros for adaptation. And even it's a high number, what does that mean? For AFD, between 2015 and 2022, we have quadrupled our adaptation finance. And I'll come to how we have worked to quadruple this adaptation finance. And to elaborate on that, I want to say we have said, a lot of us, the numbers about adaptation finance, but something that is also important in the common principle and in the elaboration of the roadmap on support to adaptation challenges is not only the quantity, it's the quality of adaptation finance. And that's really, really important for us internally to look at the quality of adaptation finance. To let you know a little bit, and I'm going to be a little bit operational, practical, how do we assess the project at AFD? Every time we have a project, we have to assess it against a country climate sheets. And the country climate sheets integrates both mitigation and adaptation. When there is a long-term strategy in the country, of course, we build on the long-term strategy, the low carbon and resilient. As you said, it's really a music to my ear that you're reminding that actually low carbon doesn't mean that we have to forget the resilient part of the development pathway of Article 4.19 of the Paris Agreement. And actually, what we do also now, since a few years now, we have a climate risk screening tool. Every single project presented at the identification committee of AFD, which is the first committee, has to be assessed against this climate risk screening tool. It doesn't have to be a climate project. Any kind of project has to go through that tool so that we can identify if there are risks that have to be taken into account, vulnerabilities that have to be taken into account, so that during the appraisal process, the project team can go further and try to advise on how to integrate climate. And maybe a recent example I had recently with one of my colleagues covering the health sector, it was a project on hospitals to increase the health services in Martinique, in the Caribbean. And it was not, the climate was not integrated, but because of the screening tool, we were assessing the risk of flooding because of the position. And initially, it was not a climate project. So that's really important to have this systematic approach on all and every single project. On top of our projects, there is also, at AFD, we are doing, and all the details are on a TCFD report that we just released, the second TCFD report 2 weeks ago or 2 or 3 weeks ago in English. And we are trying through, in the report, we are showing what are our procedures on our governance to report on our exposure to climate risks. And all these procedures are actually written in this report. Another aspect also is the financial intermediation, because I think Cynthia was also presenting one of the category, which is financial intermediation. As part of our due diligence, risk assessment on every financial institution we are supporting, we have to integrate part of on climate risks, both physical and transition. It's part of our procedures now. So it's not only the financial assessment that we are usually doing to look at the creditworthiness, to look at the KYC, we're also looking at the climate risks of our financial intermediary, mainly banks in our system. So, of course, we are doing well through the practices that I'm presenting, but what is important when we are a development institution and trying to improve our practices is to perform evaluation. And we have actually done an evaluation on adaptation in sub-Saharan Africa and Madagascar, and the report is online. I'll summarize. And the report is online, so I invite all of you to look at it. The interest of this evaluation, it was on a long life span, so it was from 2012 to 2018. And maybe the main messages of that evaluation is that we have to include more the monitoring of the adaptation impacts of our project, but also how to better target the vulnerable countries and population. How do we ensure that the impacts we are looking at on the vulnerabilities are actually being achieved? We also try to learn from the others, so we are also undergoing through a benchmark of practices of other partners, of course KfW, but also World Bank and USAID to go through that. We also have a few facilities that are targeting on adaptation, and that would be close to my last word. We have a program called Adaptation. On top of presenting this project, what I like is it has a participative approach in formulating the priority projects in the countries where adaptation is working. It's with the government, it's with civil society. Before even doing any feasibility study, we're trying to build with the community what would be the right response to the adaptation changes in the country of intervention. Last, given our focus, and as you can see, we have been developing a lot and elaborating a lot on improving our practices in adaptation finance. We are really happy that IDFC joining is adopting also these common principles on adaptation, these updates, and AFD being a part of IDFC is seeing that really positively. Because first, it improves, of course, as you say, we're going to speak the same language, and that's really important to ensure that we are consistent across partners. It also gives better monitoring and transparency. It's really important to be able to show to the citizens what we call adaptation finance and what is included in it. So our transparency is really high in our agenda. And lastly, for us as AFD, we really appreciated the exchanges we had with other IDFC members first, and also with all MDB's partners, which allows to learn from each other and to try to improve our practices and to integrate within our own practices the best from the others. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Atika. Thank you, and a lot of really important comments there that I want to come back to in a moment with the MDBs, especially on how that transparency element helps, not just, as you say, the public, but also in terms of investment, especially when we're trying to crack that very difficult nut, which is the private sector bringing revenues in, something that you also mentioned, Karima. Let me turn to you, who's patiently been there, and the Turkish Industrial Development Bank, I guess as its raison d'etre, Feridun, has actually the mission to encourage economic development in Turkey, clearly. But to what extent now has the concern around adaptation finance, become a sort of part of your work? Are you mainstreaming it? How are you handling it? What are the challenges that you see in terms of both the country, but also how are you working with your clients on this area? Over to you, Feridun.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here with such distinguished participants. Actually, the Mediterranean region, Turkey is in the Mediterranean region, and it's one of the future hotspots about climate change impacts. Just to summarize what Turkey will face in the projections, that there will be much less precipitation in the southern part of the Turkey, and there will be intense precipitation other parts of the Turkey, and there will be floods and landslides, and there will be hotter days in all seasons. So these are all, and also the intense and longer duration of droughts will face Turkey. So it's all about water issues, it seems like that. And it's not surprising, actually, as UN Water says, water is the medium that we see, we experiment the severe climate change impacts on us. And the policymaker has revealed a plan to mitigate these risks, to deal with these risks, and national adaptation strategy and an action plan in 2010. And it identifies 5 key pillars, and the majority of the pillars are directly or indirectly about water. So when we talk about adaptation in Turkey, it just sounds about water, we can say. So how is the water situation in Turkey now, not in the future? In the future it will be bad, but now how is it? We have 25 river basins, and 2/3 of the river basins are facing water scarcity now, and some of them face severe water scarcity. And these basins include largest cities of Turkey, largest industrial zones, and also agricultural production regions. So also we faced lots of droughts in the last decades, and then we exacerbated the groundwater depletion. So we actually used the reserves that we would need much as the climate change intensifies. So let me give you a number of a World Bank study for the water issues in Turkey. 10% decrease in water supply in Turkey would cause a 6% decrease in GDP, causing approximately $50 billion a year. So water is pivotal in adaptation. But, you know, adaptation and resilience benefits are often invisible and hard to track because it's the first benefit is the avoiding the loss when risk realizes. And of course, some projects have increasing productivity benefits, but it comes later. In Turkey, this structure makes private sector to stand back. In Turkey,
not just in Turkey.
Yeah, not just adaptation investments are thought to be the job description of the government, local or central government. But actually, we feel in the field that it's changing in Turkey now. Some private sector actors are demanding an adaptation investment, especially in water. And TSKB, in TSKB, we provide financial support for especially wastewater treatment facilities. So we help our clients to mitigate their vulnerability, to decrease their vulnerability to water scarcity risks, and also contribute to the national adaptation plans aim for water resources management. Finally, I want to add just what are we doing in economic research. I'm from economic research. We are studying water issues since 2018. And we track the water problem and in Turkey and share our perspectives in both our colleagues in the bank and outside the bank and all our stakeholders. And also we give some advisory services for the top-level management of the private sectors about the risks and importance of the mitigation of these risks. And moreover, specific advisory service that I want to mention is that we support the national campaign in Turkey aiming to increase the public awareness of the water stress. And we were the strategic advisor of the project, and we calculated a water stress index, a high-frequency water stress index. And actually, it was quite impactful, so we are proud of that, and I want to mention. And it's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Feridun. And thank you to all of you here on this first part of the panel. Now, we're going to hear from the multilateral development banks in a moment, and I'm going to ask colleagues to be ready to switch our sound a bit. But first of all, let me thank all of you for helping us sort of set the scene. And I think in the next section, we'll ask a little bit about what the institutions are doing, but maybe speak to some of the points that have been raised here, in particular from the sort of Barbados and the Turkey perspective, questions around the role of supporting countries and their national plans, which seems to be extremely important. But also that really difficult one, the private sector, and the role of the MDBs. So anyway, thank you so much to you, Karima, Feridun, and also Atika, and also Kaisa as well. Baisa. Thank you so much. And if you could just let your microphones behind you, and we will do a quick swap over to seats, and I'm going to say thanks very much. Everyone give them a good clap. And I'm going to ask colleagues to come and sit in your place. Gianpiero, why don't you come? Okay, let's go for it. Gianpiero, one of EBRD's areas of expertise has actually been doing the thing that we've talked about a lot, which is getting the private sector mobilized to support adaptation finance. We all want to know how you're doing on that job. So give us a perspective on that, and you know, how you're approaching it. What can we learn from EBRD?
Thank you very much for the question. Thank you for having me here. it's an interesting question, not an easy one to address. So let me just be very transparent. We are not doing enough.
None of us
we are
doing
not
enough.
having enough traction in this aspect. Despite, we've done a lot of analysis trying to understand the solutions. And clearly, being primarily a private sector-oriented organization, 3/4 of what we do, in fact, uses private sector channels. It's still quite difficult to find the commercial drivers for private companies to invest in adaptation. Again, we're not talking anymore about cost, we're talking about investments, and that's quite critical because we want to identify what are the benefits of investing in adaptation projects in terms of increased value of assets, increased cost of disruptions, and this is the narrative and the approach we are really trying to introduce in the way we engage with private clients. Yet, the level of adaptation finance is not anywhere near what it should be. And again, BISA gave us an indication about the major gap in the international climate finance towards adaptation. Now, maybe I'll give you, though, a few of the ideas that we are currently exploring and applying. Yep. There are many, in fact, many things we are trying to do. I'll maybe focus on three. One is the work we do in terms of adopting new financial approaches. For example, we are increasingly using result-based finance approaches to scale up adaptation finance, using, for example, sustainability-linked loans approaches, whereabout we introduced climate adaptation KPIs as a part of the financial structure. One example, a project in a very recent project in Ukraine, which is a country that we have, it's very much part of, the core of our activity. It's a loan to Astarte, is a major agribusiness company that operate under 2,000 hectares of land. So as a part of our loan, they have committed to increase substantially the amount of land that adopt regenerative agricultural practices. These entail a number of benefits. One is, of course, reduced amount of inputs, but also very much reduced amount of water use. And Astarte operates in part of the country which are exposed to disrupted rainfall patterns, and because irrigation, in particular in the southern part of Ukraine, is not particularly available, this entails really improve the resilience of their operations. There's one example. So sort of I would call it financial innovation up to an extent. A second example is the work we do to connect adaptation investments to the green capital markets. At EBRD in 2019, I think we've been the first MDB issuing climate resilience bonds. There was a methodology developed together with the Climate Bond Initiative. We've been issuing over €1 billion of bonds based on our portfolio of adaptation investments in infrastructure sector in particular. And we're trying now to use this methodology to engage with a variety of clients, corporate clients, but also, for example, municipal clients that are increasingly looking into adaptation investments at the city level. And the third example is perhaps more focused on SMEs. We have developed for quite some time a tool which we call Green Technology Selector, which is a web-based B2B platform where companies can upload their technologies. And this technology cover a wide variety of sectors. They cover energy efficiency, they cover small-scale renewable energy, they cover heating and cooling. But crucially, there are a number of technologies there that are really targeting adaptation investments, from drip irrigation technologies to sensor and management systems. And basically, these technologies, this kind of list of technologies, catalog of technologies, an open source platform, whereabout SMEs in particular can look at what type of solutions they can adopt in their operations, and they can utilize these also to get finance from the financial intermediaries that we finance.
I want to go to Julia in a moment just to talk a little bit about the capital market side. But before I do, how does the methodology fit into all of these initiatives that EBRD is doing?
It fits in two ways, I must say. Actually, I want to do a small detour, because clearly all of us, we are all applying, a Paris alignment approach in our operation. Any new operation is reviewed in respect to the Paris alignment. And I must say that now that we screen systematically 100% of our investments, this is a way to actually have a better understanding of physical climate risk, and clearly this entails a conversation with our clients and opens up the space to identify actions, measures, sometimes investments that can reduce the exposure to climate risk. And clearly the methodology helps because particularly when we look at the enabling part of the methodology, it's a way to engage with our clients and try to achieve systemic improvements in the way they operate their business. So it's about really changing the business model and the way they integrate climate considerations in their corporate practices and in their decision-making processes.
Which to an extent has happened already in the mitigation space, but this is about pushing that in adaptation. Giulia, maybe I can ask you a little bit about what you're doing at the Asian Infrastructure Bank in terms of you have issued Asia's first adaptation bond earlier this year. You have just launched your inaugural climate action plan as well. So tell us a bit about how that works and how does, I mean, maybe if I can also pick up on what I also asked Gianpiero, how does the methodology fit, for example, with the new bond? Is there a relevance there?
Yes, no, thanks, Shireen. Maybe I'll start with the climate action plan because I think it's very important to underline and kind of set the context as to what are the key messages that we're trying to say there. So what we try to bring in our climate action plan is to basically say that the battle against climate change will be won or lost in Asia. And that is because Asia is not only the largest emitter, but it's also the place that is mostly vulnerable to climate change. It's the place where most of the natural disasters are happening. And it's also the place with extremely strong growth potential. It's a place where there's a lot of infrastructure needs. There's $1.5 trillion needed to invest in infrastructure every year by 2030. And so, like Karim said, the infrastructure is not only a solution, but it's also a problem because it's also one of the largest emitters. So understanding that and realizing that our climate action plan speaks to kind of 4 principles. And I think they also corresponding to this needs to understand the country needs. So we are only really emphasizing that we are a client-driven bank, that we're looking at the country sector platforms and looking at the different approaches where countries tell us what are their actual needs in this regard. Second thing is the holistic approach. We're really trying to emphasize that, you know, we need to look at both mitigation and adaptation as well as nature-based solutions, looking at how it can contribute and help nature. So we're trying to say every single project will be looking to make sure it maximizes all of the benefits. Third point in there, which speaks to the private sector mobilization and our work with the issuance of the adaptation bond. Second one as an MDB, but first one for Asia is looking how we can bring in more private sector capital. So by issuing the bond, we want to also, you know, raise the awareness in the market that adaptation is actually an investable case, you know, that there is interest in there and that we have a good and strong pipeline and we can use our credit ratings and as a strong bond issuer in this space to raise awareness and bring the understanding that there is a strong investment case in adaptation. And that's also linking to the work we do with the private sector clients as well. I'm glad to say that, for example, we've also financed a project with TKSB together, financing it with the Turkish Development Bank, where we also looked at what they're doing in this field. And so the methodologies is helping us in a sense because we, first of all, doing it jointly. So the project we're co-financing with other MDBs, then the clients actually hear that we are asking for the same type of questions because the problem arises when you speak to different MDBs and they say, well, we're asking you for this type of information and the other MDB is asking us for a different type of information. So having a common methodology is really helpful for our clients as well because then we're speaking to the same language and asking for the same things. And one last point also to emphasize is what is great about this methodology is that it's really linking to our Paris alignment methodologies, right? So we've talked about that earlier on the principles on the Paris alignment, how we assess the projects against their mitigation goals and their adaptation goals. So those are actually, when it comes to adaptation analysis, are very linked to the adaptation tracking methodology. They're following practically the same